Haha, you're so funny.
We're in a new location. Next time, we'll be at your mama crib.
Sort of looks like we're in like the back.
This is like level 2 of the back rooms, I'm pretty sure.
We haven't advanced very far, and we probably won't make it much further. This is probably.
I fear we'll die here. We're just keeping it real.
We're studying the Loire River and thus the Loire Valley, broken up into four major regions, going from west to east.
Can I help you?
We have Penante. Actually, let's annotate.
Oh my God, it's that time of day where we draw.
Penante, and then we have the Anjou
Osh.
Anjou Saumur, and those are going to be more towards the maritime climate, seeing as they're closer to the moderate influence of the Atlantic Ocean. As we move inward, who would have thought we're going to go to more a continental climate as we get into Touraine and the Central Vineyards. Let's talk about climate, grape growing, and the regional or the IGP of Val de Loire, or the PGI.
Yeah, so there's one regional IGP, Val de Loire, covers the whole thing. And so, like we said earlier, we got that kind of mix of maritime and continental climate as you go inland. As such, you get a range from moderate to cool temperatures as well. The most desirable locations on the Loire River are going to be on the mid-slope facing the river for additional heat that you get when the sunlight bounces off the water and onto your grapes. One of the big concerns here for grape growers is that fungal disease is propagated by rainfall. And since there's very wet seasons here, fungal disease poses a very real threat to the vines of the Loire.
So we'll talk about some of our winemaking techniques. For wines that are going to be a little bit more fruity in style, our white wines are generally going to have a more gentle pressing with temperature controlled fermentation to make sure that those flavor aromas are getting preserved through a slightly cooler fermentation, since we know that white wines are going to ferment at slightly cooler temperatures as opposed to red wines. Some producers are going to ferment in old oak to impart more flavors and more complexity, while some are going to choose to age in newer oak. We'll see this debate in the old world, especially France a lot. Are we going to use new oak? The answer is maybe or no.
Maybe.
Most of the time, it's either maybe or no. Malolactic is sort of dependent on style, sort of a general thing. But if you are in a cooler vintage and you want to drop that acidity, you may choose as a winemaker to put your wine through Malo. Two primary grapes that we're going to look at. Sauv Blanc is not as popular as Chenin, but we'll see Sauv Blanc being used in the Central Vineyards as well as Touraine.
Chenin Blanc is probably the most important non-aromatic grape variety for Touraine and Anjou Saumur. The weird thing about this this particular varietal is that on the whole cluster, you'll have grapes that grapes ripen at different times on the bunch. So you might need multiple passes through the vineyard to ensure that you're getting the correct ripeness on your grapes, which of course increases labor, which could affect the price of your wine. So styles of Chenin Blanc could be dry to sweet, and that's pretty much reflective of the ripeness of the grapes when you pick them. So if they're ripe, they're going to be probably like dry, but if they're left to raisinate and dry in the sun, you can make sweet wine out of that. You could also have botrytis infected Chenin Blanc, and that's how we get sweet wines. Chenin can also be made still to sparkling. So you use the barely ripe fruits for sparkling. And your style, of course, like I said, is dependent on the ripeness level. Young wines could have characteristics of apple to like tropical fruits. And Chenin is actually very capable of aging for like decades. And as they age in bottle, they'll develop characters of honey, of toast, hay, all the while maintaining that high acidity. And one more thing about Chenin is that it's very influenced by the soil it sits upon. So the climate and the soil can shift the style of your overall wine.
We'll then talk about our not least planted, but not as a common white grape that we'll see in the Loire. We're really just going to see this in the Penante region of Muscadet, or I guess the Muscadet region of the Pénate.
Mhm.
Melon Blanc is also known as Muscadet or Melon de Bourgogne.
I don't think your mic's on.
Oh, that's why we have to do the mic check. Is yours on?
Nope. No, mine's on.
Okay, well, I'm sure it picked up some of that. Well, either way, Muscadet is an early ripener and is generally resistant to frost, making it a little bit more adaptive and resistant in that sort of maritime cooler climate in the Pénate. Going on to Nantes itself, we're in that cool to moderate maritime climate, producing these high acid wines with slightly lower alcohol due to that cooler climate. And some regions do require a slightly lengthier aging time for their wines. We briefly mentioned Muscadet. We're going to talk about some different subsects of Muscadet, like Muscadet Sèvres-Almaine, which is known for its extremely high quality wine production using Melon de Bourgogne. Wines in this region are generally going to be fermented dry with a medium level of alcohol and fermented in large format oak barrels. Modern winemakers will sometimes use concrete or stainless steel. And this sort of use of oak might have been more of a traditional sort of use of oak for fermentation instead of aging. Usually we're seeing a light body Melon de Bourgogne with subtle notes of green fruit characteristic, high acid, and generally young drinking.
Next, you have Muscadet sur Lie. As the name suggests, it sits on the lees. So Muscadet sur Lie is actually bottled in the spring after the vintage. So it actually spends that winter just sitting on the lees, gaining the texture and the complexity that that autolytic character that you really want from aging sur Lie. It leads to wines that are also delicate and fresh.
Anjou-Saint-Mer, as we move slightly more inward, is made up of a couple different regions where we'll see a lot of white wine production. I don't believe we have a lot of red wine production in these regions, but
Cabernet Franc.
A little bit of Cabernet Franc, maybe we'll see. But Sauvignon produces full-bodied Chenin in a more dry style, perhaps due to, not perhaps, but due in part to the air circulation that's provided in the region, which helps prevent noble rot and allows wines to get into a more, allows vines to ripen to a point in the autumn where they're able to be picked later than normal. So we're having an increased sugar concentration, which is able to give us this more complex, full-bodied wine. Côte de Lion, which is right along the river of the Loire, provides a beautiful atmosphere for botrytis to live and exist. So we're seeing a lot of sweet wine come out of this region. And the lack of air circulation as compared to Sauvignon makes sure that it helps botrytis not activate, but expand and spawn and really latch on to the grapes themselves.
The Saumur of our Anjou-Saumur. Mainly here you'll see a lot of sparkling wine made out of Chenin Blanc. Everyone in France is pretty much going to use the method Champenois. So we'll have very light, we'll have Chenin Blanc that's made with sparkling wine, which will be called Crémant de Saumur, perhaps. Crémant is the term used for sparkling wine that is created outside of Champagne. Also here in Saumur, you will have light-bodied fruited expressions of Cabernet Franc, our red grape of the region. These wines are typically best consumed while they're young, and honestly, they're best served chilled. Some producers are making fuller-bodied styles that can actually stand up to aging. Finally, we have Anjou of the Anjou-Saumur. Mainly here we'll see dry wine production, and there's some usage of new oak here. Overall, in the region of Anjou-Saumur, you'll have a mid-Atlantic influence. And like I said, big grape here, Chenin, with dry to sweet styles, and your hand harvesting can also influence the final sweetness of the wine.
And we talked about all this stuff, so we can move right on to terrain. We're getting into that continental climate as we move ever so inward towards the mainland, White Touraine is a designation, generic appellation that can be used for the entirety of Touraine if you're using Chenin Blanc, or pardon me, Sauvignon Blanc. We're moving on to Sauvignon Blanc as we get more inland. Although there is some Chenin production, Sauvignon Blanc does lead the production in Touraine. There's a little less concentration if we're going to this generic appellation. It's simple, but it's nice and fruity, and you are likely going to use a varietal labeling technique, and you might call it Sauvignon de Touraine. Chenin Blanc is very versatile, like we know, dry to sweet style, and same with Sauv Blanc. Vouvray is going to be our key region for Chenin Blanc production. This can be made in the still sparkling style, and the clay soils really allow it to gain complexity. It allows it to gain fresh, fruity characteristics, a little bit of floral notes, allows the body to get up to that sort of light to medium category. And there is a nice sort of structure of acid that allows the wines to sort of stand up on their own legs, so to speak. We're having some oak used and rarely new oak. There is some Cabernet Franc that we're going to see in this region, in the regions of Chinon and Bourgues. Light, fruitier styles we're seeing. Generally, early drinking, the soils are a little bit sandier, but in the areas where the soils are a little bit more rich with clay and limestone, these can be a little bit fuller bodied and perhaps a little bit more tannic as well. Some oak use in these regions with Cabernet Franc, and these bottles that are a little bit more fuller bodied with a little bit more tannin have some potential to age. Also depends on the style and the vineyard.
All right, finally, the most eastward, the Central Vineyards. Big two appellations here are going to be pretty much household names, I believe, Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. Both of these prestigious appellations both grow and use Sauvignon Blanc in their wines. Some Sancerre, actually, it's said that they have some potential for it to age, but it's not typically common. Pouilly-Fumé can have a subtle smoky character, like fumé is smoke in French. Finally, just another important appellation. You have Monteux-Salon. It's important, like I said, due to it's actually surprisingly high quality and a lower price point than Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. So if you want a more like bang for your buck kind of thing, that's pretty similar. You could buy a Monteux-Salon. In the Central Vineyards, since we're so far east and inland, we have that continental climate. And you have that climate is often like brisk and it cools very fast into the harvest season. And as such, you can have issues with bud break due to the short season and cool springs. Here, Sauvignon Blanc ripens very early, so it's actually perfect for this region and can potentially avoid the frost.
All right, we'll then talk about some black grape varieties. Cabernet Franc is going to be our primary black grape. Thinner skin than its subsect Cabernet Sauvignon, but this is an early ripening and early flowering grape variety that generally has an easier time ripening and doesn't need as much heat as, say, Cabernet Sauvignon. It still likes a warm climate, but doesn't need as much heat necessarily. It is possible to make this wine in a range of styles, which same to Chenin Blanc, depends on the soil, depends on the climate, and depends on the winemaking styles. You're generally going to have a little bit more herbaceous quality with some notes of green fruits, perhaps even some vegetal. And you're going to see this take a sort of backseat to our white grapes in the whole of the Loire. Our other black grapes are going to be Gamay, and we're typically going to see this in an early drinking style with some plantings in Anjou-Saumur as well as Touraine. Pinot Noir has a little bit of acreage in the Central Vineyard, but we don't see a lot of this. We do, however, see it come back when we talk about rosé.
Rosé all day, baby. What's up?
Yeah.
So here are some actual ACs, AOCs that we have for rosé in the Loire. We have just the general Rosé de Loire. Next, you have Cabernet d'Anjou. It's a very high quality rosé appellation. You have styles ranging from medium dry to medium sweet. The rosé here is actually a blend of Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. Moving on to our Rosé d'Anjou. It's typically a drier style and primarily made of a local black grape called Grolieu. Grolieu? I don't know. Finally, Sancerre actually makes some rosé, and here it must be made with Pinot Noir. Like we said, it comes back. Generally, Sancerre rosé is generally pale in color, light body, dry, and it's very light and fruity. When we are making a rosé wine, again, we have that dry to sweet style, and you want a direct press on these grapes. It's a pure style, and you have very short contact of the skins, allowing to extract that rosé flavor without it getting like too red. You also want a short maceration to get a little bit of that tannin flavor and the color from the skins. And finally, a lot of rosés in the Loire are fermented in inert vessels, such as concrete or steel, to retain the fruit characteristics of the grapes themselves. And I think
just some wine regions
just
where
the wine regions,
where we might
Anjou,
see
Sommaire, Sommaire, and
Sommaire
Sommaire Champagny. She Anjou on my Sommaire to like Chenin Blanc.
vile,
Absolutely
absolutely disgusting.